J'ai alors dessiné mon serpent boa. Il avalait un éléphant. Il était une fois un petit prince qui habitait une planète à peine plus grande que lui. Et il y avait un renard qui lui disait « On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur ». Mais le petit prince ne comprenait pas encore.
I have never had power in my life. Not the kind that opens doors or silences rooms or makes people step aside on a crowded sidewalk. I have student debt and a studio apartment in Washington Heights and a job at a children's bookshop on... But I have one thing. I have the voice. Not a singing voice, not a commanding voice, a reading voice. The low, warm, unhurried frequency my grandmother used when she read to me during thunderstorms in our apartment in Marseille. The one that made the walls stop shaking and the rain sound like applause. She read me Saint-Exupéry. She read me Prévert. She read me the back of cereal boxes in a voice that made ingredients sound like poetry. And somewhere between her kitchen table and a degree in French literature and 3 years of reading aloud to children who came into the bookshop afraid of words, I learned that the human voice, at the right pitch, at the right pace, in the right language, can unlock a door that nothing else can reach. I didn't know that yet. Not really. Not until the Tuesday afternoon in Central Park, when I found a 5-year-old boy standing alone on the path near Bethesda Fountain, crying so quietly that most people walked past without noticing. He was small, dark curls, enormous dark eyes, a navy peacoat that was hand-stitched. I could see the buttonholes from 3 meters away, and my grandmother sewed, and you learn to read stitching the way other people read price tags, and those stitches said money, old money, the kind of money that doesn't need logos. He was holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, and he was shaking. I was on my way home from work. Tote bag over one shoulder, Le Petit Prince, in the side pocket, because I'd been reading it to a group of 6-year-olds that afternoon and hadn't put it back on the shelf. I was tired. My feet hurt. I had a bag of groceries to pick up and a radiator that needed bleeding, and a landlord who answered texts the way governments respond to petitions, slowly, reluctantly, with no intention of follow-through. But I have never been able to walk past a crying child. My grandmother said it was a deficiency. She was probably right. I knelt, not crouched, not bent over, knelt, both knees on the asphalt, bag set down beside me, hands on my thighs, face at his level. My grandmother taught me this. You do not tower over a frightened child. You come down to where they are. Hey, I said softly. Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay? Are you lost? He looked at me. The tears didn't stop, but the shaking slowed, the way a radio signal clears when you turn the dial a fraction. He said something. Quiet. Rapid. Not English. Not Spanish. I speak enough restaurant Spanish to take a lunch order, but this wasn't Spanish. Not Italian. Close, but softer, rounder. The vowels curled at the edges like the pages of a book left open in the sun. French. The boy was speaking French. N'aie pas peur, mon chou. I said, Don't be afraid, little one. Je suis là. Comment tu t'appelles? I'm here. What's your name? His whole body changed. It was like watching a lock turn. The tears didn't stop, but his eyes, those enormous, dark, drowning eyes, went wide with something I had seen 100 times in the bookshop when a child heard a story in a language they understood. Recognition, not of me, of the sound, of the frequency. Matteo. He whispered. Je m'appelle Matteo. Je cherche mon papa. Il était là et maintenant il est parti et je... His breath hitched. He switched to Italian mid-sentence, the way bilingual children do when one language runs out of breath, and then back to French, and his words tumbled over each other like stones in a river. I caught them. one by one, the way my grandmother caught mine. D'accord, Matteo. On va le trouver, ton papa. Mais d'abord, respire avec moi. Oui? Inspire, expire. Okay, Matteo, we'll find your dad. But first, breathe with me, yes? In, out, he breathed. In, out. His small hand reached forward and took mine, and his fingers were cold, and his grip was the grip of a child who has found the one frequency in a static-filled world that sounds like safety. I didn't know who his father was. I didn't know that 3 men in dark suits were already converging on our location, that one of them had been speaking into an earpiece for 45 seconds, that the name, Ferrante, meant anything other than a surname. I just knew that a 5-year-old boy was holding my hand, and he was breathing, and the rabbit was no longer shaking. Before I tell you what happened when his father arrived, lock it in. If the most dangerous man in the city finds you sitting on a park bench with his son, asleep on your lap, reading him a French children's book, and he looks at you with an expression you can't read and says, "I need you to come with me." Do you stay because the boy's hand is still holding yours, or do you walk away because you know instinctively that this man's world has edges that cut? Hold your answer. I want to compare at the end. I didn't plan to read to him. It happened the way all the important things in my life have happened, without a plan, without a strategy, with nothing but the instinct my grandmother wired into me before I was old enough to question it. When a child is afraid, you read. Matteo wouldn't let go of my hand. I walked him to the nearest bench and I sat down, and he stood beside me with his rabbit pressed against his chest and his breath still hiccuping, and I reached into my bag and pulled out. Le Petit Prince. Vardu. Tu connais cette histoire? Do you know this story? He shook his head. C'est l'histoire d'un petit prince qui vit sur une toute petite planète, pas plus grande que cette fontaine là-bas. It's the story of a little prince who lives on a tiny planet, no bigger than that fountain over there. I opened to chapter 21, The Fox. I always start with the fox. It's the chapter about taming, about how you show up at the same time every day, and you sit a little closer each time, and you say nothing, and eventually the fox trusts you. Not because you earned it with grand gestures, because you earned it with regularity, with patience, with the willingness to be boring in the name of being safe. I read. My voice dropped into the register my grandmother used, the low, warm, steady hum that is not performance and is not whisper, but is something in between, the frequency of a woman who has all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. I read about the fox and the rose, and the secret that the fox tells the prince before he leaves. And by the time I reached the line, on ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur. Matteo was asleep, on my lap, his head against my collarbone, his rabbit wedged between us, his hand still holding mine. I kept reading, quietly, not for him now, for myself. Because the story is about a man who crashes in the desert and finds something he wasn't looking for, and I was sitting in a park reading to a stranger's child, and I had a feeling that my desert had just begun. I didn't hear them approach. The suits, 3 of them, moving through the park with the controlled precision of men who are trained to find things. One of them spoke into an earpiece. Another positioned himself 10 meters to my left. The third stopped directly in front of the bench and looked at me the way security guards look at things they are not sure are threats or miracles. Signora, his voice was careful, professionally neutral. Il bambino, he is with you? He found me, I said, or I found him. He was on the path. He was crying and no one was stopping, and he was speaking French and I speak French. So I stopped. The man's expression shifted. Something behind his eyes recalculated. Un momento. He stepped away, spoke into the earpiece. Rapid Italian, too fast for me to catch all of it, but I caught enough. Il ragazzo sta bene. The boy is okay. Una donna, parla francese. A woman, she speaks French. Lo ha calmato, sta dormendo. She calmed him. He's sleeping. There was a silence on the other end that I could feel from 5 meters away. Then the man came back. Please, he said, stay. His father is coming. I stayed. What else was I going to do? The boy was asleep on my lap. He arrived in 9 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when the guard told me to stay, and I checked it again when the black SUV, the kind with tinted windows and armor plating that I'd only seen in movies about people I was now sitting adjacent to, pulled up on the curb, and a man got out. I have read 1,000 characters in 1,000 books. I have voiced pirates and kings and dragons and quiet fathers who tuck their children in and say good night, moon. I have imagined dangerous men in the abstract, on the page, in the safe space between Once Upon a Time and the end. I had never seen one in person. Nico Ferrante was 6'3" and built like the men in Renaissance paintings, not slim, not decorative, but constructed for purpose, the kind of body that makes a charcoal overcoat look like architecture. His jaw was sharp enough to cut the conversation short. His eyes were gray-green, the color of sea glass in January, and they moved across the scene. The bench, the boy, the book, me, with the systematic precision of a man who has been trained to read a room the way I read a sentence, for what's missing. He stopped 8 feet from the bench. His phone was still in his hand. His mouth was slightly open, and he did something that, according to every piece of information I would later learn about him, Nico Ferrante does not do. He froze, not paused, not assessed, froze. The way a person freezes when they see something they have wanted for 2 years and have paid $340,000 trying to produce, and have failed, and here it is, on a park bench, in a yellow cardigan, reading a paperback that costs $8.99. His son was asleep, on a stranger. Speaking, he'd been told on the phone, in full French sentences, for the first time in 2 years, to a woman no one in his organization had ever seen before. Matteo had not spoken to a stranger since his mother died. Nico stood there, 8 feet, phone in his hand, and for 11 seconds, I counted them later, in the retelling, because those seconds would become the hinge of everything. He said nothing. Then he turned to the nearest guard. His voice was so low I almost didn't hear it. The woman in the park. Find everything about her. Everything. He didn't speak to me first. He spoke to his son. Matteo. His voice was Italian, low, rough. The voice of a man who is trying to be gentle and is out of practice. Matteo, svegliati. Papa è qui. Wake up. Papa is here. The boy stirred. His eyes opened, and when he saw his father, he did the thing that broke me. He looked up at Nico, and then he looked at me, and then he tightened his grip on my hand and said, in French, to me, not to his father, Est-ce que tu reviendras? Will you come back? The sound that came out of Nico Ferrante's chest was not a word. It was the sound of a man who has just heard his son speak a complete sentence to a stranger for the first time in 26 months and does not know which organ is producing the feeling that is currently dismantling him from the inside. Oui, mon chou, I said. I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. It came out in my grandmother's voice, the promise voice, the one that is not negotiable. Si tu veux, je reviendrai. If you want, I'll come back. Matteo nodded. He let go of my hand, slowly, one finger at a time, as if releasing a thread, and went to his father. Nico lifted him, one arm. The boy weighed nothing in those arms, against that chest, and Matteo pressed his face into his father's neck and said something in Italian that I caught. Papa, lei parla come mamma. Papa, she speaks like mama. Nico's eyes closed, just for a second. When they opened again, they were wet, and he was looking at me, and I understood. In the way you understand things that are bigger than language, bigger than French or Italian or English, that I had just walked into something I was not going to walk out of easily. What's your name? He asked. English. His accent was Italian, with corners worn smooth by years in New York. Colette Marchand. Where did you learn French? My grandmother. She was from Marseille. She raised me in French before I learned English. I studied it at NYU. I read to children at a bookshop on Amsterdam Avenue. You read to children. It's my job. It's not your job. He looked at the book in my hand. Le Petit Prince. The Fox chapter. The line about seeing with the heart. Your job is a thing you do for $14 an hour. What you just did is something I have spent 2 years and more money than you will earn in a decade trying to make happen. And it has not happened. Not once. Not with the therapists, not with the nannies, not with the specialists I flew in from Paris and Lyon and Geneva. He held my gaze. My son has not spoken to a stranger since his mother died. He spoke to you, in her language, in full sentences. I didn't know what to say. I held the book against my chest. I'm sorry about his mother, I said, because that was the only thing that mattered. Something moved behind his eyes, the same recalculation I had seen in his guard's face, but deeper, more tectonic. Colette Marchand. He said my name like a man filing it. I will find you. He walked away. Matteo's face was still buried in his neck. The 3 guards fell in behind him. The SUV doors opened and closed, and the vehicle pulled away, and I was sitting on a park bench in Central Park with a battered copy of Le Petit Prince. And the unshakable feeling that I had just been seen, fully, completely, dangerously seen, by a man who makes seeing his profession. He found me in 31 hours. Not him. His information. The dossier arrived at the bookshop. Not physically, not a folder on the counter, nothing that crude. It arrived in the form of a man in a dark suit, standing across the street from the shop, at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday, arms folded, watching the door. I saw him at 9:15 when I opened. I saw him at noon when I went to the deli for a sandwich. I saw him at 3 p.m. when a group of second graders came in for story hour, and he moved to let their mothers pass. At 4:30, I walked outside with a cup of tea. I crossed the street. I stopped in front of him. If you're going to follow me, I said, you might as well carry my groceries. His name was Dom. He had been assigned to me. Those were the words he used. Assigned. Since 6 a.m., he was not allowed to tell me why, but the discomfort on his face suggested that the answer involved his employer, my name on a file, and a phone call from the back of an SUV that began with the words, "Find everything." Tell Mr. Ferrante, I said, that if he wants to talk to me, he can come to the bookshop during business hours. I'm here 9 to 6. We close early on Sundays. Dom blinked. I went back inside. Nico Ferrante walked into a children's bookshop on Amsterdam Avenue at 9:12 a.m. on a Friday morning. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my annual rent. His shoulders were too wide for the doorframe. His son was holding his hand, and his rabbit, and looking at the shop the way children look at places that smell like possibility. Wide-eyed, cautious, hopeful. I was shelving. Good night, Moon. In the toddler section, Ms. Marchand. His voice filled the shop, the way a bass note fills a cathedral, not loud, but present in every corner. Mr. Ferrante. I set the book down. You found me. I told you I would. You also had a man standing outside my shop for 31 hours. I gave him tea twice and a copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which he accepted but did not read. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would go on a man who had not fully committed to the architecture. I have a proposal, he said. I'm not for sale. I haven't offered to buy anything. Men who send dossiers before they send invitations usually are buying. He absorbed this. He did not argue. He did not deflect. He stood in my bookshop, too large for the space, too powerful for the context, and he looked at his son, who was already drifting toward the reading corner, drawn by the beanbags and the fairy lights, and the promise of a place that was built at his scale, and he said, "My son has not spoken to a stranger in 2 years. Not to nannies, not to therapists, not to the specialists I flew in from Paris, from Lyon, from Geneva. I have spent $340,000 on child psychologists, speech therapists, play therapists, and trauma counselors. None of them produced a single sentence." He paused. "You produced 11. In a park, in French, while reading him a book that costs $9. $8.99, I said. "We have it in stock, if you'd like a copy." The almost smile again. "I would like to hire you, as a French tutor, for Matteo, once a week, at a fee you name, at a location you choose." "Why once a week?" "Because the therapists came every day, and he stopped answering the door. I'm told that patience is more effective than saturation." He looked at the reading corner, where Matteo was pulling a picture book off the shelf and opening it on a beanbag with the serious attention of a 5-year-old who has found a church he trusts. "The fox in the book you were reading to him. Chapter 21. The fox says you must show up at the same time, every day, and sit a little closer each time." I looked it up. He had read Le Petit Prince. For his son, overnight, my throat did the thing it does when I am about to say yes to something I know will change my life. It closed, and I swallowed, and I pressed my hands flat on the counter, and I breathed. "Tuesdays," I said, 4 o'clock, here, in the reading corner. I'll read to him in French. No curriculum, no assessments, no reports. Just reading, just the voice. Just the voice, he repeated, and the way he said it, slowly, carefully, as if learning a phrase in a language he did not yet speak, told me that the most powerful man I had ever met had just encountered something he could not purchase, could not replicate, could not command into existence. A sound, a frequency, a woman reading French to a frightened boy in a yellow cardigan. The Tuesdays became a country. Matteo arrived at 3:55, always early, always holding his rabbit. He sat on the same beanbag, the blue one, second from the left, and he waited. And when I opened the book and began to read, his entire body exhaled. I read him. Le Petit Prince. Same book, same chapter, every week. Chapter 21. The Fox, my grandmother's voice, and each week, Matteo gave me a little more, a word, a question, a laugh, that sounded like a bell being rung for the first time in a church that had been closed. Week 3. He said my name. Not Colette. Coco. The French diminutive. He named me the way children name the things they intend to keep. Week 5. He brought a drawing. A woman in a yellow cardigan. A book. A fox. Week 7. He fell asleep on my lap again, and when Nico came in to carry him to the car, Matteo murmured, still half asleep. Coco, lis comme maman lisait. Coco reads like Mama used to read. Nico looked at me. I looked at him, and neither of us said the thing that was in the room, because the thing that was in the room was too large, and too fragile, and too new to survive being spoken. Week 9. Nico asked if I would come to the house. Matteo wants to show you his room. He's been asking in French, which means he's been asking, which is the point. He paused. My mother will be there. She lives with us. She has opinions. About me. About everything. But especially about you. Renata Corsetti was 64 years old, and she was made of the same material as the limestone house she lived in. Beautiful, cold, load-bearing, and entirely convinced that her structural integrity was the only thing keeping the building standing. She met me in the sitting room. Pearl necklace, silver chignon, an expression that could have been a smile or an autopsy, depending on the light. So, she said, in Italian, "Questa è la ragazza del parco." This is the girl from the park. "Piacere, Signora Corsetti," I replied, in Italian. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Corsetti." Her eyebrows moved a fraction. She had not expected me to understand. She switched to Italian entirely, assuming, or testing, my limits. "Mio nipote non ha bisogno di un'altra donna che finge di essere sua madre." My grandson does not need another woman pretending to be his mother. "Non sto fingendo niente, signora. Gli leggo un libro. Questo è tutto." "I'm not pretending anything, ma'am. I read him a book, that's all." She studied me. The full sweep, the body, the cardigan, the canvas bag, the shoes. I have been looked at like that since I was 14. I have a system for it. The system is, I look back, once, level, long enough that they know I saw it. Then I go back to reading, "È grossa," she said to Nico, as if I were not in the room. "She's big." I could have responded. I could have said something sharp, something defensive, something that would have made her retreat. I didn't. I took Matteo's hand, and I said, in French, to him, "Tu veux me montrer ta chambre, mon chou? Do you want to show me your room, sweetheart?" And Matteo pulled me out of the sitting room, chattering in French, and behind us, I heard Nico say to his mother, in Italian, very quietly, "Mamma, lei capisce tutto." Mama, she understands everything. The silence that followed was, I'm told, magnificent. I read to Matteo every Tuesday for 4 months. Same book, same chapter, same voice, same beanbag, then same bedroom floor, then same reading chair in the library Nico had built. For me, he said casually, for the reading, as if men routinely construct libraries for women who read French to their children for $200 an hour. I'm not going to tell you about the library. I'm not going to tell you about the way Nico Ferrante sat outside the door every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, back against the wall, legs stretched across the hallway, listening to me read his dead wife's language to his living son. I'm not going to tell you about the evening I came out of Matteo's room and found Nico in the hallway, with his eyes closed and his head tipped back against the wall, and his face, that controlled, architectural, titanium-reinforced face, wet. I'm not going to tell you about the night Matteo had a nightmare and called for Coco, not Papa. And Nico phoned me at 2 a.m. and held the phone to his son's ear, and I read chapter 21 in my pajamas, in my studio apartment in Washington Heights, while a 5-year-old boy calmed down on a pillow that cost more than my mattress. I will tell you about the conversation. It was a Sunday. Mateo was asleep. I was in the kitchen, not the formal kitchen, the family kitchen, the one with the tile Elise had chosen, and the herbs on the windowsill that nobody watered anymore until I started watering them, because my grandmother said, "You always water a dead woman's plants. It's the least you can do." Nico came in. He leaned against the counter. He folded his arms. He watched me water the rosemary. "You water her plants," he said. "Someone should. The staff. The staff water on schedule. I water when they're thirsty. There's a difference." He was quiet. Then, "My mother said something about you today." In Italian. I know what she said. You didn't respond. No. Why? Because your mother is grieving, Mr. Ferrante. She lost a daughter-in-law she loved. She is watching a strange woman read French to her grandson, in the house where her daughter-in-law used to read French to her grandson. I am not going to fight a grieving woman. I'm going to water her dead daughter-in-law's rosemary and read to her grandson and let time do the thing time does. I set the watering can down. My grandmother taught me that. She said, "La gentillesse n'est pas de la faiblesse, Colette. C'est de la patience avec des racines." Kindness is not weakness, Colette. It is patience with roots. He unfolded his arms. He picked up the book. Le Petit Prince. The battered copy I carried everywhere, the one his son had fallen asleep on, the one with the fox's secret underlined in pencil by my grandmother 23 years ago. "On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur," he read. His French was halting, accented, a man sounding out a language he had married into, but never mastered. "L'essentiel est invisible pour les yeux." One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Your grandmother underlined this, he said. She underlined everything she wanted me to remember. What did she want you to remember? That the important things are never the ones you can see. I looked at him. You ordered your men to find everything about me. You know my credit score, my student debt, my address, my grandmother's maiden name. You have everything about me, but the thing that calmed your son, the voice, the frequency, the way I read, that isn't in a dossier. That's the essential thing. And it's invisible. He set the book down. He looked at me across the kitchen counter, and I saw it happen. The moment when a man who has spent his entire life acquiring information realizes that the most important thing in his son's world, and therefore in his, is not something he can find, buy, file, or control. Colette. He said my name the way he said French words, carefully, as if the syllables might break. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Ask, instead of take. Want, instead of acquire. He looked at the book. The fox says you have to show up. Same time. Every day. Sit a little closer. That's what the fox says. I have been outside that door every Tuesday for 4 months. Same hallway. Same wall. I know. You knew. Your aftershave comes through the door before your silence does. He almost laughed. Almost. The architecture of his face shifted. The jaw, the brow, the line of his mouth. And for 1 second I saw the man underneath the building. And he was tired. And he was lonely. And he was sitting a little closer. Tuesday, he said. Tuesday, I said. He reached across the counter. Not for my hand. For the book. He closed it carefully, the way you close a door you intend to open again, and he slid it back toward me. Read to me, he said. Chapter 21, The Fox. It's for children. It's for people who need to learn how to sit still and let something important happen. He pulled a stool to the counter and sat. I'm sitting. I opened the book. I found chapter 21, and I read to the most dangerous man in New York, in my grandmother's voice, in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and grief and the slow, patient beginning of something that did not yet have a name. On ne voit bien qu'avec le cœur. Read slowly. Grandmother's register. 4 seconds of silence after. Let it land. I'm not going to tell you what Tuesdays became. You'll have to come back for that. But I'll tell you this. Renata Corsetti waters the rosemary now. She does it on Wednesdays, the day after I come, and she does it without being asked, and she has not said a word about it, and neither have I. And last Tuesday, after I finished reading, Matteo looked up at me and said, in French, clearly, without hesitation, Coco, tu peux lire à papa aussi. Il a besoin du renard. Coco, can you read to Papa too? He needs the fox. If you are the woman with the voice, the one who reads, the one who kneels, the one who shows up at the same time every day and sits a little closer, I made this for you. Hit subscribe. Share this with the woman who has been reading to everyone else's children while no one reads to her. And tell me, did you pick stay or walk away? Because my grandmother would have picked stay. She would have sat on that stool, and she would have opened the book, and she would have said, Chapitre 21, Le Renard. Chapter 21, The Fox. If you felt that voice in your chest, the one that sounds like your grandmother reading to you when the world was loud, drop a like. Tag the woman who shows up. Tag the woman who reads. New story every week. Hit the bell. And if you want to know what the fox taught the mafia boss, you'll have to come back for that.